Welcome to our session, New Geopolitics of the Twin Transition, jointly organized by European Aluminium and Eurometaux. A warm welcome to all of you here in sunny Malaga, but also to our online audience. Thank you for being here. I'm Giulia Fornione, Senior Public Affairs Manager at European Aluminium, and this is my co-moderator, Chris Heron, Director of Communication and Public Affairs at Eurometaux. With today's session, we want to address how Europe is dealing with the extremely complex geopolitical challenges that we're dealing nowadays. Particularly, we want to clarify the EU approach in dealing with strategic raw material dependency, but also identify concrete measures for policymakers and industry representatives to tackle this issue. And how are we going to do that? We're going to start our debate with an interview with Peter Handley from the European Commission, who is going to provide a perspective of what the EU has been doing so far to address strategic raw material dependency. Then I'm going to ask our panelists to join us on stage for the actual discussion, and we're going to discuss together what is missing, what do we need to do in order to tackle this issue. And also, we're going to have the opportunity to hear about concrete and successful examples already happening here in Europe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Chris. But before doing that, I want to invite you, all of you, to engage in the discussion. Obviously, for those of you who are here in person, just raise your hand when we're going to open for Q&A, and we will try to address as many questions as possible. But also, for those of you who are online, start crafting your question in Slido now. You should be able to see a QR code, voila, here. So just scan it with your phone, go on Slido, and start typing now. And now, without further ado, Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julia. So we have a clear... Hello? Perfect. Thank you, Julia. So we have a clear what and how for our debate today, ladies and gentlemen. Before we move to our interview with Peter Handley, let me just take 2 minutes of your time to provide some context for why we're here today. And that's because today's geopolitics have unbalanced the scales for Europe's clean energy manufacturing goals. That's been the case ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, which alerted us to the vulnerability of our supply chains. Since then, our industries in Europe have experienced a series of shocks. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the energy crisis and high inflation that followed, the US Inflation Reduction Act and the redirection of investment flows to where subsidies are highest, and most recently, China's decision to impose export bans on germanium and gallium, two absolutely critical metals for our clean energy and digital transition, and a warning signal about potential further weaponization of raw material supply chains this decade. But in our panel, we're here to talk about how we can rebalance these scales. Oh, sorry, before then, the consequences for our industries are severe. The risks we have are increased costs for our manufacturing here in Europe, at the same time as a reduction in security and sustainability. As mentioned, we want to discuss here, though, the solutions for rebalancing these scales. And here we have a narrowing opportunity to turn political signaling into concrete actions. We heard a few weeks ago from President von der Leyen a commitment to a made-in-Europe clean energy transition. We think that needs to be delivered with a real industrial policy affecting these challenges on the ground. If we can get that right, then we can have that energy transition which has security, sustainability, and affordability together. But the challenge ahead of us is enormous. It's with that backdrop which we've given a quick interview with Peter Handley from the European Commission. He couldn't unfortunately be here today, but 2 days ago we interviewed him about his key priorities now for addressing these challenges. I'll go to that interview now before we bring our panel on stage. And I know that Peter, although he's not here, will be watching the debate afterwards. So if we could all give a warm round of applause to Peter Handley. Thank you. So I asked Peter 4 questions 2 days ago, 4 questions which we'll go through now. The first question was about that State of the European Union address, the commitment to Made in Europe and a new assertiveness for Europe. I asked Peter, how will that assertiveness manifest itself in what he does now to implement the Critical Raw Materials Act and also the broader Green Deal industrial plan. Let's hear his response.
I think this year's State of the Union speech was interesting for the fact that critical raw materials appeared in many parts of the speech. And a lot of the things that the President announced, we have already seen in the Critical Raw Materials Act, for example, being the platform for collective purchasing, where that makes sense. But I think it's clear that there is a very strong drive to reinforce the European Union's economic security as a whole, and securing supply sustainably and responsibly sourced raw materials is a key part in that.
So clear from this, the European Commission has this renewed drive towards greater economic security, a drive that we've maybe not seen since the introduction of the Green Deal back in 2020. My second question related to germanium and gallium, these two exotic raw materials, but ones with real consequences if their exports are restricted. My question to Peter was, what concrete measures is he taking in the European Commission in response to these export bans? And what tangible outcomes does he want to achieve for its local industries? Let's hear from him.
Well, we would like to see that this introduction of export licensing is first removed by China. We don't think it's justified. But secondly, we hope that all European industrial players will realize that this is an opportunity to be seized in order to reduce our strategic dependency on China for both gallium and germanium. And what we're doing is we're having conversations, joined up conversations on the part of the Commission services. I'm talking trade, industry, defense, and digital, talking to companies which use gallium and germanium to try and get them to come on board with investing in or off-taking from the kind of projects that we could do here in Europe or with trusted partners. And we have mapped quite a good range of potential projects for both gallium and germanium. The key thing now is we need to get the business case together.
So gallium and germanium, again, a very specific case study, but one which could be a precedent for the decade to come. And we're encouraged, I guess, that the Commission is really doing what we think is needed to bring the upstream, downstream together to find a common approach to these challenging geopolitics. The third question links to our existing industries. President von der Leyen committed to learning from the mistakes of losing our solar PV industry in Europe for our EV supply chain. We could say the same for raw materials. In the last years, we've consciously let go of our production of gallium, of magnesium, even of rare earths. And we also see a very tangible risk that a strategic material like aluminium, represented in our debate today, could be the next gallium in a decade's time if we don't make preemptive steps now. So the question to Peter is, what preemptive steps is he taking to ensure that we don't create further dependencies for a strategic material like aluminium? Back to Peter.
Well, there's so many answers to this question, but let me start off with the CBAM, which is now entering into force in its first phase. We'll see how that goes. There's also the work on the transition pathway for the ferrous and non-ferrous metal sector that we're working on together with stakeholders from industry and member states. But there's also many interesting elements in President von der Leyen's State of the Union speech. It's very clear that at this stage in the political cycle, we have to make sure that we join up the Green Deal agenda with what it means in terms of a growth and competitiveness agenda. There's so many points in the State of the Union speech which make that clear. And I think the first step is going to be these roundtables that Executive Vice President Šefčovič and probably also the President will be conducting with different sectors between now and the end of the year.
So the Green Deal has to be allied with a strong competitiveness agenda. Nowhere is that more important for strategic raw materials like aluminium. The last question relates to the global power statements we've seen in recent weeks. Countries aren't satisfied just to have the mining resources on their home territories. They want to build the processing too. The European Commission has established its own ambitious goal to supply 50% of its processing needs from processing domestically by 2030. I asked Peter if the global statements are complementing or contradicting what he's trying to achieve.
We think that the processing and refining of these metals and minerals is the crucial piece in the jigsaw puzzle. And the key challenge that the whole world has to address is how to spread the capabilities to do these functions, because at the moment, increasingly, wherever the ores are sourced, they're all heading in one direction, to China, which has built up a huge and very dominant position in the global supply chain. This is not necessarily a healthy situation. So we think from the European Union perspective that on the one hand, we want to keep and develop further the processing and refining capabilities we have here. And secondly, that we encourage any country which wishes to develop into this space based on its own resource endowment should have our help to be able to do so. We do not see processing and refining in third countries as being in competition with us doing it here in the European Union.
So processing and refining is the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle in our raw materials agenda. And whether it's aluminium or gallium or lithium, Europe wants to have that domestic supply base where it can within an overall diversified global supply base. With that, I'll hand over to Julia and take us to our panel and Q&A.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Peter Handley, for setting the scene. I now ask our 4 panelists to join us on stage. A big round of applause for them as well. Thank you. So today, here with us, we have Guillaume Pitron, journalist and author of the big-selling book, Rare Metals War. Miguel Lopez Quesada, President of Arcoa Spain and European Corporate Affairs Director. Laura Casuccelli, Senior Advisor for Trade and Competitiveness at Wind Europe. And last but not least, Ryan Parker, CEO and Managing Director at Infinity Lithium. Thank you for being here with us. I want to start with you, Guillaume. So, in 2018, you published The Rare Metals War, already warning that the resource race is on. Now, 7 years later, world geopolitics has completely changed. Where is Europe today in this race? And why it's important that we work to grow our domestic supply chain?
Well, does it work? It's going to work. It's working now? Yes, it's working. Thank you. I published a book, and thank you, by the way, for bringing some books to the audience. I wrote that book back in 2018, that was published in 2018, but that was written 1 year or 2 years before. At the time, no one cared. There was just no interest in this subject matter. The thing is, as you said, the geopolitical landscape has changed. COVID-19 made us realize that we were needing some masks and some aspirin from China. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine suddenly made us realize our dependencies over gas imports. So that changes the mindset and also our understanding of what globalization brings in terms of positive impacts and negative impacts for our resilience. For the last 2 years, everything has changed in this respect. Look at what the EU Commission has been doing and the European Union. They've been reviewing their critical minerals list. They've been working on setting the goals that we have talked about for mining, refining, processing on the territory. There is more recycling, obviously. The battery regulation is very, very clear in this regard. By 2031 or 2036, we have to recycle what we use, but we have to reuse what we have recycled and put these metals into the batteries. There is a mineral diplomacy also. There is maybe a coming critical raw materials club with EU countries teaming up with external non-EU countries in order to secure supplies and diversify sources. I would say that it's a way different landscape. It's just has nothing to do. And even Thierry Breton, the commissioner, and Ursula von der Leyen start speaking about it. And I remember times back in 2015-16 at the EU Raw Materials Week in Brussels, taking place every year in November, we were very few people talking about it, and even at the higher level of the DG Grow, no one wanted to speak about that. It was just like a matter of administrative, technical discussions, not a political discussion. So it's changed. On the paper, I would say it's very good. Now the question is, what do we do? I mean, in terms of concrete steps, because it's good to set the goals and to set the framework, but in terms of moving the administrative body behind that in order to apply concretely these goals, that's another story.
And Guillaume, I was with you in 2015, one of the few people talking raw materials at the time. You're happy that the world has woken up to this, Europe has woken up to this. How would you rate our efforts in Europe compared to global competitors, very briefly?
I would say we really liked, it depends which competitors, but look at Japan. Japan has been a country which has no resource, no mineral resource on its ground. The understanding by Japan of its dependencies over foreign supplies of raw materials has been very clear for the last, I would say, 12 years. They have developed a strong mineral supply policy with buying bodies, public bodies, able to secure the resources with foreign partners. They have had a strong recycling policy, much stronger than we have done. They have established a list of rare metals before we did. So I would say Japan has been much more in advance because they have this understanding that we haven't had. And the international, the Inflation Reduction Act also has been very strong and very strong in subsiding these efforts in this domain. So I would say that Europe is following. I would say it's late comparing to the United States and Japan, but we have something to come up with, which is a Critical Raw Materials Act, which sets our claims and our goals. So that makes us legitimate in the global discussion. But I would say there are more efforts to be done if we want to compete with the United States and Japan.
All right, now turning to you, Miguel. Aluminium is one of those strategic raw materials where Europe risks growing its dependency from the loss of industrial capacity. What does the example of Alcoa's and Cyprian smelter restart teach us? What does it show about the needs to keep strategic raw materials here in Europe?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation. I think that we all have agreed now that aluminium is something that we cannot live without, but it has taken a long time to realize so. And I think that one of the first audiences we had to convince about the relevance of having such a primary production in Europe have been our politicians. We all like the industry, we all need the products, we all want to have a better life, but we don't care that much about, no, it's not working. We all want to have the products, but we don't have the collateral damages or impacts of that, the side effects. I was saying that we all now have agreed that we want a certain quality of life and products, and those are very much related on raw materials and basic products like aluminium, but we don't want to know how they are made, where are they made, and what are the costs or the externalities of making them close by. So I think that we have to realize if we want to have an industry in Europe, that is a question that I would pose to many of our politicians and to our societies. If we want to have an industry in Europe, because that is linked to quality jobs, it's linked to prosperity, it's linked to taxes, education, growth, then we now add resilience. We are able to face moments of difficulty where we have seen that we didn't have those resources, we didn't have that ability to remain resilient. So if the answer to those questions is yes, we definitely have to do things. And things like we have been doing. We have to secure definitely a stable and competitive energy cost in Europe, because energy is definitely the raw material for electro-intensive industries, and we don't have such a competitive framework in Europe, which is preventing us from having really others competing against us. We have to have regulation, but smart regulation, certainly, and very, very good effective policies. And then we have to have education from both the authorities and the industry towards the societies on what is it going to be taken to have this industry. We need to have license to operate, and that we will have to say about the wind farms. We will have to have mining around, because we are going to need all that supply chain if we want to really be resilient and sustainable. And that is what we have been trying to do in San Ciprián.
Miguel, just on San Ciprián, so you have this smelter here in Spain, it's been curtailed. You have plans to bring it back online. Everything we heard from Peter Hanley, this is exactly what our strategic autonomy needs.
Yep.
But you're not sure you can do it. So what are the few factors of success for a smelter like yours, really practically, to be online in a few years' time?
One is permitting. We are expecting to have 50% of our capacity or of our needs of energy being renewable, coming from electricity, but the wind parks are subject to permitting still. So in order to be back on the race in 2024, we need that energy to be built and to be accessible. Another thing is that we are refining in this location, but this refinery requires gas. The gas price is definitely not affordable still. So we have to have competitive energy prices. We have to have a social dialogue with the communities, because the communities have to accept that this is going to happen, and then we have to support this with long-term planning and long-term view on the political and regulatory side.
All right, many thanks, Miguel. We're now moving to Laura from Wind Europe. So wind turbines requires a secure and affordable supply of raw materials, such as aluminium. You're also supplying the clean energy that materials producer need in order to decarbonize. What are your new raw materials priority as both material consumer but also energy providers?
Thank you, Julia. Yes, so basically, in order to produce a turbine, we need a lot of different materials and composite materials and raw materials. So just to give you an example, 70% of the volumes is steel for a turbine, but we also need materials such as fiberglass for the blades, and aluminium, which we need for cables, for the electricity. We also need rare earths, and that is where our main complications are centered. Rare earths for permanent magnets that provide a very efficient solution and light solution for offshore wind turbines. So we have this series of materials that we need to ensure can be supplied in a secure and stable way. But what needs to be mentioned is that the demand for these materials is only going to increase exponentially in the coming years. So if we think that in order to meet the renewable energy targets for wind, we have to reach an installed capacity of 420 gigawatt by 2030. Today, this would mean around 30 gigawatt per year, but today we are only able to install around 15, 16 gigawatt only. So there is a huge gap in terms of capacity that will also require the equivalent amount of materials. Well, the problem now to be mentioned is the fact that for most of these materials, in terms of volumes, we depend on imports from outside, and this has proved to be a pretty dangerous, risky, dangerous to be in. After the war in Ukraine, after possible threats of retaliations from China, it is a very dangerous moment to be dependent on the outside sourcing. So what we want to prioritize at the moment in terms of finding the solution is to reduce these dependencies and to ensure that we can have a stable and secure supply, not only today, but in order to meet the installed capacity of tomorrow.
So Lara, security of supply is a major priority for the wind industry, also affordability of supply. And I've seen in some of your policy asks recently, you're even going as far as to suggest some sort of incentives should be in place for the wind industry to buy local, buy sustainable. I guess that's a big journey from where Guillaume was talking about where we started this debate, but what's the context of that? Could you give some brief remarks there?
Well, what we have also experienced is the dramatic price increase for these raw materials that we need. The prices have been skyrocketing after the post-pandemic recovery, after the war in Ukraine, and this has just reached an unaffordable level for us. And what we face as a challenge is the fact that our turbine manufacturers need to bear the costs for this. And the problem is that they cannot sell the turbines at the same price as competition from outside. So the profit margins have been squeezed in the past 2 years to negative. The 5 main turbine manufacturers have experienced heavy financial losses because of this inflation. So a part of the solution could come from the way renewable energy auctions function, because until today it has been it has been a race to the bottom price. Namely, the cheapest project in wind energy wins. But this clearly also opens the door to competition from outside, where they don't have the same issues we have in terms of prices, where there is a different state aid policy, where there are possibly illegal market practices being performed. So where we see the solution is to have finally also recognized other types of criteria in an auction that value also what all the investments done by European turbine manufacturers in areas such as sustainability, environmental and social standards, but also compliance with EU cybersecurity. So these are all elements that could help value what we can offer on the European market and shift away from a purely cost-based competition.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And indeed, you're completely right. Now we're going to go a bit deeper into that with Ryan. So Infinity Lithium wants to be Spain and even Europe, I'm hearing, first lithium supplier. Why is that so important for Spain and Europe resilience? And what are you doing to reassure the communities you're working with about the sustainability and wider benefits of such project?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. Test them up. Perfect. Yeah, look, thanks a lot. Look, we are progressing. The SAN has a fully integrated lithium project in Spain, and it's important to differentiate what is supply. We're not talking about a lithium resource per se. We will be using one of Europe's largest lithium resources as a feedstock for an on-site lithium chemical conversion plant. And this plant is strategically essential for Europe for many of the points that Peter has pointed out a little bit earlier today. We're working very closely with the community, but this is against a global backdrop of a race to secure these key materials. So it's not only the critical raw materials, it's about your processing requirements and ensuring you act in an environmentally and sustainable way with the local community, and that is really a requirement to interact in Europe. We've really had to focus our efforts on working closely with local and regional stakeholders. This has included pivoting our project to an underground resource allocation, and we continue to work closely with the regional government. We're undertaking training and development opportunities through EIT and O-Energy, not only in our area, but throughout the renewable energy sector. We are working closely with the local business community to advance this project, because really social license is key when you're operating in Europe. We have stiff competition abroad that are governed by an entirely different set of rules, but ultimately we need to align this project for the benefit of the local community to see it accelerate and move forward, because there's going to be a very significant gap in Europe for the need for battery-grade lithium chemicals.
So your project's clear benefits for Europe downstream with security, sustainability of supply. You've mentioned also clearly community acceptance is key. You've made admirable progress in adjusting your project concretely on the ground. Is that a finished deal? What will you need to keep doing with those communities when you bring that mine online?
Look, I mean, I think opportunities for the community to benefit and prosper is really key. Our project is close to the community of Cáceres. It has huge depopulation issues, very significant unemployment, and the next generation really seeking opportunities. And the region and the locality is very keen to attract new industry. From our perspective, we have to make sure the project is entirely aligned to the local community. As recently as yesterday, we've had confirmation that lithium projects should be recognised as premier or projects of regional or general interest, and that will benefit from an accelerated permitting pathway, exactly the same targets under the Critical Raw Materials Act when that would come to fruition. We've also seen the regional government highlight the importance of our project yesterday and pointing towards a stimulus package to ensure the project remains competitive on a global scale and a European scale. They want to retain this downstream lithium chemical processing, which is strategically essential, and you have the ability to attract other industries. By way of example, we're lowering our carbon footprint and we've executed MOUs with an adjacent PV facility. We've sought to eliminate the need for natural gas. We're really focused on providing a sustainable and environmentally friendly, but most importantly, a socially sustainable project for the local community.
All right, thank you everyone for your contribution. You all made very relevant, important points, and specifically the need to keep, if you're serious about this energy transition, we need the raw materials, the clean technology to be produced here in Europe. We can no longer be fully dependent. Now, before we open for Q&A from our audience, is there anything, any point you would like to comment on based on the presentation that we have just heard? Guillaume.
We are in the transition 2.0. The transition 1.0 was, here is the goal, here is where we want to be in 2100. Transition 2.0 is how do we make these things possible? And no one has ever talked about this, and the politicians don't want to talk about this. My president, Macron, was interviewed recently on French TV. He talked about the gigafactories. Everyone's so happy to create added value jobs in gigafactories in the Battery Valley north of France. Everyone wants to have Tesla and CATL and Northvolt on its territory. No one wants to talk about what we just talked about. No one wants to talk about the mines. No one wants to talk about the main hurdle to the mine, which is a social community acceptation. No one wants to talk about the refinery. This is a very difficult question to be asked, because in a way, if you want to make something clean, you have to make something dirty. Who is going to pay for that price? And this is exactly where we are. And this is why it's so contentious, it's so difficult to precisely talk about these issues. Then one last point about your previous question. I forgot to say, I don't like him, but Trump was very good on this. Because Trump was, in his mindset, America first. And back in 2017, he said, but how can I accept to have critical raw materials used for my F-35 jet and my precision-guided missile coming from China? And he asked his administration to review dependencies from China at every chain of the process of the defense industry. And in that respect, the United States were in advance to Europe in order to understand how dependent they are from China. And that came from a national security perspective before enlarging to green technology. But that's why I may understand, historically speaking, that the United States have been way in advance with their logic comparing to Europe.
Anyone else?
I think that we have to make industry sexy in Europe. Industry is not really sexy in Europe, and I think that we need to attract people to work in the industry. We need to be interesting to the media. We need to be interesting to the politicians. We need to show there is value in industry, and retaining industry is creating future. And we are seeing just the results of having an industry, but we are not we are giving for granted the industry, and the industry is at a very risky moment. It's an animal in extinction risk, and we have to consider this and protect industry in Europe as an animal in risk of extinction.
And I think you can replace the word industry by the word democracy. And the fate of democracy, in my view, is dependent upon the fate of our industry. If you just if you destroy the jobs from the pre-industrial age, 20th century age, you replace them in a logical Schumpeterian logic by green jobs, which are being created somewhere else in the world, South Korea, China, the United States, then social troubles will come along. And in my view, if you don't have a strong industry, you don't have a strong democracy, you create turmoil. And this is why I would even replace in your sentence the word industry by the word democracy. This is also an endangered model, in my view, if we don't both come along. Yep.
All right, Ryan, Laura, do you want to comment? Or?
I think we can definitely agree that there needs to be more engagement with the communities to also share positive examples on what the actual benefits are from the industry and how this shapes us as an economy at the same time.
Yeah, look, I mean, if I might, I think Miguel's really hit the nail on the head. It's about, making the upstream a little more sexy in the view of Europe. We've seen, a huge amount of investment and commitment further downstream in the industry I'm in lithium-ion battery commitments, but we remain critically exposed much further upstream. We've seen commitments and targets made through the Critical Raw Materials Act, but what we need to see now is really that implementation, something tangible and something that can remain competitive, because we're seeing investment and commitment from resources outside of Europe aligned to the US and China on the back of something that is much more easily accessed.
So, summarising what we've heard so far, in Europe, I hear we've woken up to the challenge we have, clearly. We're becoming aware that there are some trade-offs involved with engaging with that challenge too, but maybe it's still a common theme that the real actions we need on the ground to bring back a smelter or to ensure that we can drive our projects forward in the right way, whether it's a wind turbine or a lithium mine, whether those actions come in practice. We'd like to take the moment now to bring your questions in from the audience. We'll take some questions from the room. I see one hand already at the back, 2 hands, 3 hands, 4 hands. And then Julia will, on her side, be fielding the questions we've received by Slido. I'll take questions in the order I see them now. Gentleman at the back, you are definitely the first, so a microphone should come to you.
Nicola.
Okay, I'm very happy that we are on the exact same footing when it comes to the microphones. My name is Nicholas Bryan. I'm creating a startup in waste management. Only one panelist, I think, mentioned recycling. You guys will probably agree on the fact that the best materials are the ones that we do not extract. So what's your view on this? You mentioned Japan as an example. What could be done in order to get more materials from recycling? We had last year, for the very first time, the ton of PET, recycled PET, trading at way higher than the ton of, I would say, classic PET. Do you see that happening with minerals in the near future? Thanks a lot.
Who'd like to come in?
I can shortly answer. Yeah, I can shortly answer. In fact, a train hides one another when you're waiting on your car at the railway. And this green transition hides another transition, which is a circular economy transition. A low carbon world is a high material world. You need more metals and minerals to emit less CO2. So we're coming with a solution, but we're bringing another problem. If we want to make the green energy transition possible and sustainable, we have to make a low carbon world and a low material world. And we're not facing one transition to be done, the green transition. We have two transitions to achieve, the green and the circular economy transition, which is way harder than the green transition. So now we are moving towards a circular world, and this is where we have to reuse what we recycle to recycle what we use. And this is where the law comes in and the tax solutions come in place in order to make the secondary material more interesting to buy than the primary material. The market hardly finds a solution here. So if you don't come along with EU solutions, EU-based solutions, tax incentives to make the secondary material more interesting, the PET more interesting to buy when it comes from secondary sources than primary sources, it won't work. So this is why I'm very happy with what you've just told before. And that must come along in the critical raw materials world.
Lara, I mean, the wind turbines in Europe are filled with metals that could eventually be recycled, but they're there for a long time, I guess. But what's your messaging on circular?
Yes, well, thanks for raising the issue of recycling indeed. The reason why I have not mentioned it before, it's because alone it is not the solution to our problems of volume. Because first of all, our products, they have a quite long life. So, for example, for permanent magnets, we cannot recycle more than probably, it's below 1%. So we still are working on solutions also on how to recycle it, where it would go further then, but most of all, we don't have enough decommissioned turbines today to make of recycling the solution to our volume problem. And also, but we are definitely supportive of any measures and incentives to look into alternative solutions to decrease the volumes, to use alternative materials that can be more easier to source. So it's definitely part of our solution, but it's still a very, very little share of the picture.
Maybe I'll just take another question now and we'll come back to the panel. I see Diego at the back. I think there's a microphone near you, and then we'll come to the front.
Hello. Yep. Okay. Perfect. Hi everyone. Diego. Was in the panel yesterday. For Guillaume, I'm interested. It's interesting to hear you say that we all want an electric vehicle. It's a huge assumption. There's a lot of people that don't want an electric vehicle actually see their cities as being able to walk in them, being able to not worry about getting hit by a car, wanting walkable cities, cyclable cities, sufficiency. I think it's also important to talk about, because a lot of this demand is coming from electric vehicle use. So I just want to stress that point. Then maybe also a more tangible point for Laura on the wind energy. I think now I understand the wind industry is really concerned about rare earths, of course. They're also going into substitution. So my question to you is, what is Wind Europe doing in terms of substituting rare earth demand for the permanent magnets included within the wind farms? What challenges are you seeing in that? Because the Raw Materials Act does also highlight the use of substitution, to reduce the level to increase the level of resilience. And then one more question from Infinity Lithium, the CEO. The community there, I'm surprised you didn't mention that the area that this project would take place is actually in a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And from my understanding, it's also that your project changes open pit mining to underground mining based on community opposition. So in that sense, how has the relations improved or since that time that your project has been around? And another point on that is, what are you doing with the waste? Because one of the biggest challenges for mining companies is waste management. So I want to ask you, what are your plans? Are you saying, maybe let me let you speak here.
Thanks, Diego. So we've got a few questions. I'm going to come to Ryan first because we've heard from Guillaume and Lara before, but Ryan.
No, thank you, because I'll forget the questions if we go the other way around. So look, moving underground was critical for us. Our project is actually located on a tin mine from the 1960s. So you walk the ground, you can see, the old shafts, some dilapidated buildings. So the community is very familiar with activity there. I think it's a very different proposition as we originally had proposed with the large-scale open pit. So our project now will be located on land that has previously been zoned as industrial, and we'll have a portal that will be accessing this material through a 1 kilometre decline under a ridgeline. So it's an entirely different project, and a project that has been supported by that local community. When you mention the UNESCO heritage listed town, yes, the town of Cáceres has an area which has a very nice old part of town, but ultimately this project will be in an industrial area. We'll now be accessing that material by way of underground on an existing mine. So I hope that answers your question on that. In terms of our waste management, that is really key, and that's something we're working closely with the regional government. Firstly, with the move underground, we can return about 60% of our material back underground by way of paste infill. So we'll be using long hole open stoping as a substitute for a bulk open mine pit. And then with the balance of that waste material, we're looking at alternative industries. There is gypsum that can be used in the construction industry and used in the chemical industry. The leach residue can be used as fly ash. So for us, our goal is to minimise that surface footprint to as close to nil as possible, and we even have opportunities to rehabilitate other sites in close proximity, other quarries, because you're right, this is all about social licence and ensuring the local community gets behind the project.
Thanks, Ryan. And Diego's other questions were related to reducing demand of materials, finding substitutes of materials, circular economy in addition there. Miguel, I cut you off before, but maybe you'd like to say something broad on the recycling circular economy topic before Guillaume and Lara respond on others.
Well, I think that recycling is always something that we all wanted, and we definitely are in an industry which is great for recycling, because aluminum is infinitely recyclable. So we are basically in a business which is circular by default. But the thing is that we need to retain the capacity to keep ourselves having control of our will, and that is basically having a primary industry. We need to be able not only to recycle what others are making, and imagine with CBAM, if you can get scrap coming from other places where it has been generated without any cautious treatment on how it has been generated. And we are going to be importing that because we just need to recycle. Well, we need to have that, but we don't have to resign the ability to keep manufacturing in Europe, and that is the only way we can cope with the demand that Laura was saying. It's increasing far beyond the capacity of the circularity to meet that demand. So I think that it's a smart way of using both the recycling and the primary industry. We have to be smart here because it's a game where we are not alone, and we are definitely competing with others which are more subsidized, more state-oriented, with a lot of effort, with energy which is far more cheap than the one that we have. And we are just here in the middle of a game which China and the US are playing, and it's playing on our face, and it's playing on our future.
So recycling, primary go together. Substitution, demand reduction also key. Lara, question on the wind sector and substitution.
Well, I believe we are still at a rather infant stage when it comes to finding the right solution, also on replacing rare earths. There are ideas of turbine models where there is already a reduction of the volume of rare earths, but the problem lies in the efficiency, and for the moment we do not have a commercially viable product that solves the problem of efficiency that the rare earths can provide. This will still require a lot of research and development, but we are following closely this evolution.
Guillaume, what would you add?
I think there was a question on EV, right?
EVs, do we all want EVs in the first place?
Well, EV is the least bad solution. It's better than an oil car in terms of protecting the climate. It's not the perfect pollution because an EV is as clean as the metals inside and the wares that are being extracted. It is as clean as the type of electricity, the grey energy which has been used for processing the metals. It is as clean as the type of electricity into the recharging station. But still, we have to go EV, right? But it's good to go EV, but there is a figure which strikes me: 55% of the new EVs sold on the market today in the world are SUVs. So if we're talking about demand reduction, it doesn't make sense to just drive on an SUV. And the thing is, the more we're progressing, the more we're using bigger cars, and we're getting exposed to China, by the way. So if there's a geopolitical thing to do, which makes sense from a geopolitical standpoint, from an ecological standpoint, is to reduce, not to go bigger.
Yes, so we received some questions from Slide as well, and there's one in recycling particularly. They are asking, in your opinion, is there a willingness to pay a premium for sustainable, low carbon or recycled raw materials? Good question.
Are the customers willing to pay that premium? They give it for granted. And it is not for free, definitely. So we all have to walk the talk. We cannot just ask for this to be green, and we don't want to pay any extra cost to make things in the right way compared to others which are not. So I think that we all have to be coherent here.
But the green world will be a more expensive world. And this debate hasn't come yet. How much is it going to cost? What will be the greenflation effect? And who's going to pay? And what is going to be who's going to take his share? Will be the tax debates around that? We had in France the Yellow Jackets riots. This was the first riots of the green energy transition. The government wanted to take a couple of cents from the diesel users and to bring that money to the wind turbines industry. And that created what we saw. People disagreed on who has to pay the price.
we've got just 5 minutes or so left before we begin our wrap-up statement. So I think I saw at least one more hand in the room. So I'm going to take 2 questions now, and then we're going to go for brief answers from our panel, so we still have time for wrap-up statements. So if microphones should come to our questions, whoever gets the microphone first can ask the question first.
Okay, fine.
Is it working? Hello? Hello? Oh, there we go. My name is Joel Johnston. I represent the Swedish manufacturing industries. So we make high technology that is exported worldwide and then contributes to the transition on a global scale as well. But something that we touched a lot upon today is the need to replace imports with domestic production capabilities.
Can you speak louder?
Absolutely. So something that we talked a lot about today is the need to replace imports with domestic production capabilities. So in terms of cost efficiency and also reducing reliance, for us it's of course very important not to just talk about replacing imports, but it's replacing over-reliance upon actors that can be, let's say, unreliable, to be diplomatic. So I'd be interested to hear a bit more about how you view how we can actually diversify externally as well. Because I mean, if you look at the internal diversification and increase in domestic production capabilities, that's also a long process. So I mean, in terms of securing demand for this very fast increase in need, we're going to need both domestic, we're going to need the recycling, but we're also going to need reliance upon international trade in order for cost efficiency, in order for meeting the demand, and in order for cost efficiency. Because that's how all, I mean, we touched upon all those subjects today.
Yeah, so a question on diversification here, which we can take. I'll just take the last comment, and then we've got about 5 minutes to wrap up on those before closing statements.
Thank you. Antonio Andreoni from South University of London. I'm also a fellow of the DG GROW for the Commission. Actually, my question follows from what has just been said. I think all of you stressed how there was a fallacy not seeing the importance of these issues, and I think we need to question what happened. Why is that at that point in time, over the last few years, we forgot about the role of production, and we've been very much focusing on innovation as a post-material type of concept, which I think is still quite pervasive across many policymakers and institutions, which prevent us from mainstreaming this kind of problems and issues. I think the second fallacy at the moment here is that we are moving in a direction where we talk about strategic autonomy, but as has been stressed, we know we need to actually establish a new relationship with international players. So for me the question is, and we are going to have a panel in the plenary later on this, what is the business value proposition that you would put in front of countries like South Africa, Chile, Argentina, which have significant endowment of these resources, and equally they want to have the right to manufacture for the very good reason that you put in place?
So it's a global diversification question, a question deserving maybe a debate in itself. We have 3 minutes 55 on the timer, guys, until we start the wrap-up. So quick responses to this, and then we'll follow up with the people afterwards. But very briefly, anyone would like to come in with their views?
I can do if you want.
Please, Guillaume.
There was this International Energy Agency meeting in Paris last week. For the first time, 50 ministries, and you were there, by the way, met around this question of critical metals. Europe said we want to process on our territory half of what we consume, and other countries like African countries, South American countries, Australia said, but I want to process my stuff on my own territory. So why should I give you my ore and you will get the best value of it? So where does my financing as a EU country and as the European bloc goes? Does it go into funding mines, or accepting that I will have to take shares and stakes into the processing facilities themselves, which will be not on my territory, which will be on their territory, and also accept exchange of knowledge and technological exchange with these countries. We are in the post-Western world. The global south is here, and they want their share of this business. They want to become electro-states, not mining state, electro-states. I just do agree with you completely.
All right, so if no one else wants to comment, as we're moving towards the end of our debate, I would like to invite you, our speakers, to provide your key takeaways, conscious of time, no longer than 30-40 seconds on today's discussion. And particularly, I would like you to think about what would you want to see happening here in Europe in the next 2 years to really take better control of its raw materials and clean energy supply chains. And I'm going to start maybe with Ryan.
Sure, okay. Well, look, I mean, I think I'm just going to directly refer to the Critical Raw Materials Act. There have been some very significant targets set that are incredibly relevant for the lithium space. I think we need visibility through the Commission and through the Critical Raw Materials Act, and something that's really tangible. There are enormous sources of funds that could be allocated to speed up these projects, to reduce red tape. We see what has been drafted, but we actually need to see something tangible. And most importantly, I think just for the final point would be the timing of this. You know, this is about really starting to accelerate and move forward. While Europe is continuing to address these issues, we have other markets that are actively moving ahead. China, obviously, but don't take your eye off the US. Have a look at what's happening in Canada last week. You know, this is all about Europe mobilising and seeing the urgency of what's in front of them.
Laura?
I think it's time for the European Union to focus on how to increase the local supply, but also incentivize the use of local. So there needs to be an alignment on this. It's coming even late with the Critical Raw Materials Act, but it's time to now act, and also faster, in order for us to create our strategic autonomy and reduce these dangerous dependencies from outside.
Miguel?
Okay, three ideas. One is that we need regulation, but smart regulation. We need dialogue with industry. This is not about industry and the rest. We are part of the society, and the society should benefit from having a stronger industry. And third, we have to regain space in the minds and hearts of the people for winning the battle, for creating a mystic about making things rather than just having intangible assets in the economy. All of our kids want to be YouTubers. None of them wants to be an engineer in a factory. We have to make industry sexy, and we definitely have to regain the hearts of the people for making tangible things in Europe.
And last but not least, Guillaume?
Among many things, I know it's underway, but I've been thinking about this for a while. Include mining into the EU taxonomy. I mean, green technology is into the taxonomy, but not the responsible mining for making the green technology, and that's just a nonsense. It's underway, by the way. It's going to be done anytime soon, but obviously that would certainly attract investors and winning investment into this field.
Well, a warm thank you to all our panelists. I hope you had a very good discussion. Yeah.
A warm welcome to our audience too. Thank you.